The three small forms huddled against Connor Holloway's chest were trembling, their silver skin flickering with patterns of distress that pulsed like dying stars. He pressed his back against the torn hull plating, one hand shielding them from the smoke that billowed through the shattered corridor, the other gripping a plasma cutter he'd grabbed from a supply locker. 30 minutes ago, he'd been cataloging repair drones in Sub-Bay 4. Now he was hiding three alien children while the station burned around him, and something massive stalked through the darkness beyond the bulkhead, its footsteps making the deck plates ring like bells. The children were small, barely reaching his waist when they'd first materialized in the maintenance shaft where he'd been working. Their skin was the color of mercury in moonlight, their eyes too large for their faces, solid black except for pinpricks of violet light that shifted when they looked at him. Each had small pointed ears swept back against their skulls, and fine luminescent markings traced lines down their necks and arms like circuitry designed by artists. The smallest one had wrapped impossibly long fingers around two of his, refusing to let go. Connor Holloway had been alone on Covenant Station's lower maintenance decks for 3 years. He preferred it. People asked questions, expected conversations, created complications. Down here among the coolant systems and waste processors, the only thing that mattered was whether a machine worked or didn't. Simple, predictable, safe. The footsteps stopped outside the sealed hatch. "Stay quiet," Connor whispered to the children, though he had no idea if they understood. They'd spoken to him once, a harmonic sound like wind chimes made of glass, but the translator in his ear had only produced static. Metal shrieked as something began tearing through the hatch, not cutting it, not burning it, just peeling it back like skin from fruit. The children's markings flared brilliant white, and the smallest one made a sound that pierced straight through Connor's chest, a note of pure terror that needed no translation. He pulled them closer, his maintenance jumpsuit already soaked with the strange fluid that leaked from cuts on their arms and legs. Not blood, something that smelled like ozone and tasted like copper when it had splashed against his lips. The hatch screamed one final time and split open. The thing that stepped through barely fit the corridor. It stood 8 feet tall, its body covered in overlapping plates that shifted colors from crimson to black as it moved. Three eyes, each the size of Connor's fist, focused on the children with an intensity that made the air feel thick. Connor Holloway raised the plasma cutter with a hand that shook so hard he nearly dropped it. "Back off." The creature's massive head tilted. When it spoke, the translator worked perfectly. "You protect sovereign offspring. Fascinating. Your species usually runs." I said back off. "They belong to the Koran Collective now. The treaty is void. The Queen's bloodline ends today." It took one step forward, and Connor could see the dark stains on its plating that might have been old blood, or might have been something worse. The smallest child's grip tightened on Connor's fingers. Her markings had shifted from white to a deep blue that reminded him of sadness, though he had no reason to know what sadness looked like on an alien. Connor Holloway squeezed the plasma cutter's trigger. The bright lance of superheated gas caught the creature across its chest plates, and it roared, stumbling backward. He didn't wait. He grabbed the children and ran. The maintenance tunnels of Covenant Station were a maze that had taken Connor Holloway 3 years to fully map. He'd walked every meter, cataloged every junction, memorized every emergency access point because down here, alone, knowledge was the only companion he needed. Now he used that knowledge to stay ahead of the thing that pursued them, its roars echoing through the corridors like thunder trapped in metal. They emerged in a junction chamber where 4 tunnels met. Connor Holloway sealed the hatch behind them and wedged a broken strut against it. 30 seconds, maybe 40. He knelt beside the children, whose markings had shifted to a pale gold that flickered uncertainly. "I need to know what you are," Connor said, more to himself than them. "Why is that thing hunting you?" The oldest child, who stood perhaps an inch taller than the others, stepped forward. Her markings brightened, and she placed one hand against Connor's chest, right over his heart. When she spoke, her voice carried that same harmonic quality, but this time the words that followed felt like they appeared directly in his mind rather than his ears. "Daughters. We are daughters. Mother is the sovereign, the one who rules." Connor Holloway felt his stomach drop. The Sovereign. Every human on Covenant Station knew that name. The alien queen whose territory bordered human space, whose fleets had crushed 3 colonial rebellions without losing a single ship, whose reputation made admirals go pale. "Your mother is the sovereign?" Connor asked. "Was," the child corrected. "Betrayed. Killed. We ran. You found us." The hatch buckled inward. Not much time. Where can you go? Connor asked. Is there anywhere safe? The child's markings dimmed until they were barely visible. Nowhere. All seek us. Without Mother, we are leverage, tools, weapons. Connor Holloway had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of complication. 3 years keeping his head down, doing his job, not getting involved. He'd learned that lesson the hard way on Helios Array when he'd tried to help a colleague who'd gotten into debt with the wrong people. He'd ended up beaten half to death in a cargo bay while his friend disappeared into the black. After that, he'd requested transfer to the most isolated posting he could find. He looked at the 3 children whose markings pulsed with fear and exhaustion, who had somehow found him in the depths of a station filled with thousands of people, who had chosen to trust him for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. The hatch tore free from its frame. Hold on to me, Connor Holloway said, and scooped all 3 children into his arms. He ran through a side passage so narrow he had to turn sideways, the children clinging to his jumpsuit. Behind them, the creature roared in frustration as it tried to force its massive body through the gap. Connor didn't look back. He counted junctions, turned at the third one, dropped down a maintenance ladder with the children's weight making his arms scream, and emerged in the station's hydroponics sector. The artificial forest stretched out in neat rows, plants from a dozen worlds growing under precisely calibrated lights. The air here was thick and wet, heavy with the smell of earth and chlorophyll. Connor Holloway set the children down behind a row of Velthari grain stalks and tried to catch his breath. We can't keep running, he said between gasps. That thing won't stop. And if your mother is dead... He stopped. The words felt too brutal. The oldest child looked at him with those bottomless black eyes. You could leave us. Safer for you. Connor Holloway thought about it. Really thought about it. Leaving them here, finding a shuttle, getting off the station before things got worse. He'd be gone before anyone knew he'd been involved. Simple, predictable, safe. The smallest child was still holding 2 of his fingers. No, Connor said. We need a plan, a real one. Why help us? The oldest child asked. Her markings had shifted to a color Connor couldn't name, something between violet and silver that seemed to shimmer. Connor Holloway didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, and it was too complicated to put into words. Something about the way they'd trusted him, the way the smallest one wouldn't let go, the way their markings changed with emotions they couldn't hide. Something about being alone for 3 years and discovering that maybe he was tired of it. Because you're here, he said finally, and I am, and that has to mean something. The oldest child studied him for a long moment. Then she did something that made Connor's breath catch. She smiled. It wasn't a human expression, not quite. Her lips didn't curve the same way, but the intent was unmistakable. We accept, she said. Alliance. Quick pause. If this story has you hooked, subscribe now and hit the bell. These are made for people like you. Now, back to it. The plan formed in fragments while they moved through the hydroponics sector, staying low between the plant rows. Connor Holloway knew there were emergency pods scattered throughout the station, designed for rapid evacuation. Most were locked to authorized personnel, but he'd repaired the access systems on 3 of them. If he could reach Pod 7 and bypass the security protocols... Stop. The oldest child froze, her markings flashing red. Something comes, not the hunter, others. Connor Holloway heard it a moment later. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with military precision. He pulled the children down behind a nutrient tank just as 6 figures emerged from the far end of the hydroponics bay. They wore armor he didn't recognize, matte black with silver trim, and they moved like people who'd killed before and expected to kill again. Spread out, their leader said. The sensors picked up thermal signatures in this sector. The Sovereign's spawn are worth more alive, but the collective will pay for corpses if necessary. Mercenaries. Connor's jaw tightened. The creature hunting them had been terrifying, but at least it had seemed to operate on some kind of code. These people were just here for money. The smallest child's markings had gone completely dark, as if she was trying to disappear. Connor felt her trembling against his side, felt the rapid flutter of something inside her chest that might have been a heartbeat, or might have been something else entirely. He still had the plasma cutter. 6 targets, maybe 15 meters to the nearest cover. The odds were terrible. Connor Holloway had survived 3 years on Covenant Station by being smart, not brave, by calculating risks and choosing the path that kept him intact and uninvolved. Every instinct he'd honed told him to wait, to hide, to let the mercenaries pass and hope they didn't look behind the tank. The smallest child's fingers tightened on his hand. He moved before he could think. The plasma cutter's beam caught the nearest mercenary across the helmet, and the woman went down in a spray of molten metal. Connor grabbed the children and ran toward a maintenance shaft he knew opened onto the lower decks, the air behind him splitting with weapons fire. They almost made it. Connor Holloway was 3 meters from the shaft when something hit him in the back like a hammer made of lightning. He stumbled, crashed into the deck plating, tasted blood. The children scattered, their markings blazing with alarm. The mercenary leader stood over him, rifle raised. Stupid. Heroic, but stupid. Connor tried to move, couldn't. His back felt like it was on fire. He could see the children huddled together near the shaft entrance, their markings pulsing in patterns that looked like distress signals. Don't, he managed. The shot never came. Instead, the air above the mercenary's head rippled like water, and something massive materialized out of nothing. Not the creature from before. This was different. Taller, sleeker, its skin the color of storm clouds, marked with patterns that glowed like molten silver. When it moved, 3 mercenaries died before Connor's next heartbeat. The creature was impossibly fast, its movements precise and brutal. The remaining mercenaries tried to run. None of them made it to the exit. Then the creature turned to face Connor Holloway and the children, and he saw its face properly for the first time. Feminine features, sharper than human but unmistakably elegant. Eyes that held galaxies. Markings that matched the patterns on the children's skin exactly, only brighter, more complex, more alive. The oldest child made a sound that was half sob, half song. She ran toward the creature, her sisters following, and the massive figure knelt to gather them in arms that looked capable of tearing through hull plating, but cradled the children with infinite gentleness. Mother, the oldest child said, and Connor understood that he'd gotten something very wrong. The sovereign, because it could only be her, looked at Connor Holloway where he lay bleeding on the deck. Her eyes were the color of deep space, black with points of violet light that seemed to see through him. You protected them, she said. Her voice was like her daughter's, harmonic and strange, but deeper, carrying weight that pressed against Connor's chest. Why? Connor tried to answer, couldn't find his voice. The pain in his back was spreading, and his vision kept blurring at the edges. The sovereign moved closer. She was even taller than he'd thought, perhaps 7 feet, her body proportioned like a human woman, but wrong in ways that made her seem like she was carved from starlight and mathematics. Her skin was pure silver white, marked with patterns that flowed and shifted like living things. She had 4 arms, each ending in those same 2 long fingers, and when she reached toward him, he flinched despite himself. Peace, the sovereign said. You burn. I can stop it. Her hand touched his back, and the fire became ice, became nothing. Connor gasped, felt his lungs fill properly for the first time since he'd been shot. When he looked up, the sovereign was studying him with an expression he couldn't read. You are Connor Holloway, she said. It wasn't a question. Maintenance technician, solitary, unremarkable in your people's eyes. How? My daughters told me. They are young, but their minds are strong. They showed me everything. The sovereign's markings shifted to a color that reminded Connor of gratitude, though he had no reason to know what that looked like on her. You were alone. You could have hidden. Instead, you fought. You bled. You chose them over your safety. Connor Holloway managed to sit up. The children were clustered around their mother, their markings bright and synchronized with hers in patterns that looked like music made visible. I thought you were dead, Connor said. They said you were betrayed. I was, my own counsel. They sold my location to the Corin Collective, believing my death would allow them to seize power. The sovereign's markings darkened to something that might have been rage. They forgot that my daughters carry my genetic key. They forgot that I can die and return if even one daughter survives. They should not have forgotten. Connor looked at the bodies of the mercenaries, at the casual brutality of how they'd been torn apart. You were testing them, your counsel. Yes, I needed to know who would betray me when they thought I was vulnerable. The sovereign's expression was alien, but Connor could see something in it that looked like satisfaction. Now I know. The purge will be thorough. She stood, her daughters moving with her like satellites around a star. Connor Holloway expected her to leave. The test was over. She had what she needed. Instead, the sovereign extended one hand toward him. Stand, Connor Holloway. He took her hand because refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting. Her skin was warm, her grip careful despite obvious strength. When he was upright, she didn't let go immediately. My daughters chose you, the sovereign said. Out of thousands on this station, they found you in the darkness and decided you were safe. Children know truth. They cannot be deceived by appearances or lies. Her markings shifted again, becoming something softer. I would know why they chose correctly. Connor Holloway had no answer that made sense. I don't know. They were scared. I was there. It seemed wrong to leave them. Wrong, the Sovereign repeated. She looked at him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Your species talks much of honor and duty, but you act from neither. You acted from something simpler. What? Kindness. She said it like the word was foreign, like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. Rare, valuable, dangerous. The smallest daughter tugged on her mother's lower arm, made a series of harmonic sounds that Connor's translator couldn't parse. The Sovereign's expression changed, became something that looked almost like surprise. She claims you as Bloodguard, the Sovereign said. She says you held her hand and did not let the darkness take her. I don't know what that means, Connor said. It means you are hers now, and by extension, mine. The Sovereign's markings flared bright, and Connor felt the weight of her attention like gravity. It means you have created a debt I must repay. It means your solitary existence ends today, Connor Holloway, because my daughter has decided you are Pack. Connor felt something inside his chest crack open, something he'd kept sealed for 3 years. I didn't ask for this. No, the Sovereign agreed. You asked for nothing. You offered everything. That is why the debt exists. She released his hand and stepped back. I will give you a choice. Return to your maintenance tunnels and your solitude. I will ensure you are safe, untouched, forgotten. Or, the Sovereign's markings shifted through colors Connor didn't have names for. Come with us. My daughters need protection while I deal with traitors. Someone they trust. Someone who has already proven willing to die for them. Someone who does not want power or position, only to do what is right. The oldest daughter stepped forward. Her markings were gold now, bright and steady. Please, she said directly into Connor's mind. We choose you. Choose us. Connor Holloway thought about his maintenance tunnels, about the 3 years of self-imposed exile, about the safety of asking nothing from anyone and having nothing asked in return. He thought about the smallest daughter's hand wrapped around his fingers, about the way she'd trusted him when she had every reason not to. If I say yes, Connor said slowly, what happens to me? The Sovereign's expression was unreadable. You become something your people have no word for. Guardian, companion, protected and protector. You will live among my kind, learn our ways, stand between my daughters and anything that would harm them. It will be strange, difficult, lonely in new ways. And if your daughters decide they don't need me anymore, then you will have honored a debt and earned respect that crosses species. The Sovereign moved closer, and Connor could see the patterns on her skin shifting like tides. But my daughters do not choose lightly, Connor Holloway. If they have claimed you, it is because they see something in you that resonates with what they are. That bond does not break easily. Connor looked at the 3 small figures, their markings bright and synchronized, their impossible eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. He thought about all the reasons to say no, about the danger, the strangeness, the absolute certainty that his life would never be simple again. The smallest daughter held out her hand. Connor Holloway took it. Okay, he said. I choose you too. The Sovereign's markings blazed brilliant white, and when she smiled, it was nothing like a human expression but everything like joy. Then we have an alliance, Connor Holloway, sealed in crisis, bound by choice, enforced by honor. She turned toward the exit, her daughters following, and Connor moved with them because the smallest one still hadn't let go of his hand. They walked through the ruined hydroponics bay, past the bodies of the mercenaries, into corridors that grew wider and cleaner as they ascended toward the station's upper levels. What happens now? Connor asked. Now? The Sovereign's markings shifted to something that looked almost playful. Now you discover what it means to be chosen by a sovereign's daughter. It is not simple, Connor Holloway. It is not safe. But I promise you this, it is never boring. They emerged onto a docking platform where a ship waited, sleek and alien and beautiful in ways that made Connor's eyes hurt. The Sovereign's guards, he could see them now, materialized from whatever stealth technology they used, stood at attention as their queen approached. Connor Holloway climbed the ramp with 3 alien children clustered around him, their markings synchronized with his heartbeat in patterns that felt like welcome, like home, like the beginning of something he couldn't name but somehow recognized. Behind them, Covenant Station burned. Ahead, through the ship's viewports, he could see stars scattered like diamonds on velvet. The smallest daughter tugged on his hand, pointed at the galaxy beyond the glass, and made a sound that needed no translation. Connor Holloway had been alone for 3 years in maintenance tunnels, where the only thing that mattered was whether machines worked or didn't. Now he stood on an alien ship surrounded by creatures he barely understood, bound by debts and choices and the simple fact that a child had held his hand in the darkness, and he hadn't let go. He looked at the Sovereign, who watched him with those galaxy eyes, her markings bright with colors he was just beginning to learn. "I'm ready," Connor said, and discovered he meant it. The ship's engines thrummed to life beneath his feet, and they rose toward the stars, where daughters of dead queens learned to be something new, protected by a man who'd chosen kindness in the dark and found it reflected back in silver skin and violet light.